By the way, once you get around Bosnia, you're going to notice something very interesting. You're going to meet people who belong to different nationalities, and yet all of these people have the same appearance, speak the same language, and in many cases even share the same surnames. So often the only way you can actually tell them apart is based on their religious affiliation. For example, the Croats are predominantly Catholic, the Bosnians are Sunni Muslim, and the Serbs are Eastern Orthodox. Besides that, almost nothing separates us, because our languages are not just mutually intelligible, they are basically identical. So when I'm speaking to a Bosnian or a Serbian person, it is as if an Englishman and an American are having a conversation. They use the same language, and the same applies to us. I actually believe that way back in history we were all part of a single ethnic group, and then because of circumstances we ended up forming different nationalities, and well, the tragedy is that we have been at each other's throats ever since. So that is the main tragedy of the Balkans. And they say that language shapes the way you perceive the world. Now, obviously, since we speak the same language, we tend to laugh at the same jokes, we listen to the same type of music, we have the same heroic stories, and at the end of the day we know how to piss each other off the best. The capital of Bosnia, by the way, is named Sarajevo. Saray in the Turkish language means palace, so Sarajevo would mean the city of palaces. Most of you do not know this, but in 1984 Sarajevo hosted the Winter Olympics. It is actually the only East European city besides Moscow which had the privilege of organizing the Olympic Games. So in 1984 you had thousands of athletes from all over the world gathering in Sarajevo to celebrate sport achievements. Now in 1992, just 8 years after that, Sarajevo was a city under siege. Basically you had snipers lurking at every corner, you had artillery shells blowing up all over the place, and there was bitter fighting for every street and every building. Approximately 13,000 citizens of Sarajevo perished during the siege. The siege lasted for more than 3 years, and it is, I believe, the longest military siege in modern European history. It lasted way longer than, for example, the siege of Leningrad. First of all, this is the oldest national park in Croatia. It has already been declared a protected natural area in 1949, and in 1979 the lakes were registered as a UNESCO heritage site. Second, this is by far the most popular national park in our country. For example, last year the lake saw almost 3 million visitors. And finally, this is the largest national park in Croatia. It has an estimated surface area of 300 square kilometers. So, depending on the course of our tour, we are either going to be ascending or descending. The lakes are divided into two categories. You have the upper lakes, and then you have the lower lakes. And they're separated with a huge lake in between. Now, obviously you're going to see a lot of waterfalls during our tour, but among those, one definitely stands out, and that is the largest waterfall in this area. It's called the Big Waterfall. I know, Croats are not very inventive, so we didn't come up with a special name for it, we just call it the Big Waterfall. The waterfall is 78 meters high, and that makes it the highest waterfall in Southeast Europe. By the way, these lakes are fed with dozens and dozens of small rivers which pass through this area, and that is why the lakes never go dry. even in the prolonged periods of drought. Now, the rivers that move through this area, most of them are subterranean rivers. You see, a subterranean river is the one which flows on the Earth's surface for a while, and then it suddenly disappears beneath the surface. And sometimes that river can emerge at a different location. And I should point out that the rivers in this part of Croatia have some of the highest concentrations of minerals in the world, especially calcium, which is extremely important for the formation of these lakes. Because you see, these lakes were formed in a geological process which lasted for about 7,000 years. And the process works like this. During the course of time, you have moss and algae which is deposited at the riverbed. Now, because of the high concentration of minerals in the water, especially calcium, the moss and algae eventually calcifies. So basically it turns into a rock-like formation which is called the travertine barrier. And these barriers separate one lake from another. Now, the barriers are actually porous, so that is why water flows through them, and hence you get a lot of the waterfalls. And this, by the way, is an ongoing process, because Plitvice Lakes were first documented in the late 18th century by a local priest. At the time, he noted there are 14 lakes in this area, while today we have 16. So obviously 2 additional lakes were formed over the past 200 and something years. And who knows, maybe by the end of this century another lake is going to pop up around here. Now, the organized tours of Plitvice National Park mostly remain at the lake area. However, you have to understand that the lakes comprise only 3% of the entire surface area of Plitvice National Park. More than 90% of the national park is actually covered with a dense, almost jungle-like forest, which you can see around you at the moment. And by the way, these are some of the oldest forests in Europe. A recent study has confirmed that some of the beech trees in Plitvice National Park are almost 800 years old. And the forest do hide a lot of animals, some very big ones. For example, Plitvice National Park is home to one of the largest colonies of the European bear. And besides the bears, you have some other animals around here, such as wolves, owls, and probably most importantly of all, the famous lynx, the last predatory cat left in Europe. There's only a couple of dozen specimens of lynxes left in the wild, and some of them are roaming the woods around you. Now, as a slight disappointment to you people, you're not likely going to encounter any of these animals on our tour, because the animals tend to stay away from people, and for good reason, I should add. However, if you ever decide to visit Plitvice Lakes on your own initiative, you can arrange a safari trip with the park authorities, and they will take you deep inside the woods so you can observe the bears, the wolves, and the lynxes in their natural environment.
The psychological soul plan for coming back into one's own is as follows. Take extra special caution and care to lose yourself into the wild gradually, setting up ethical and protective structures by which you gain tools to measure when something is too much. You are usually already very sensitive when something is too little. So the return to the wild and free psyche must be made with boldness, but also with consideration. In psychoanalysis, we are fond of saying that to be trained as a healer-helper, it is as important to learn what not to do as it is to learn what to do. To return to the wild from captivity carries the same caveats. Let us take a closer look. The pitfalls, traps, and poison baits laid out for the wildish woman are specific to her culture. Here I have listed those that are common to most cultures. Women from differing ethnic and religious backgrounds will have additional specific insights. In a symbolic sense, we are composing a map of the woods in which we live. We are delineating we are delineating where the predators live and describing their modi operandi. It is said that a single wolf knows every creature in her territory for miles around. It is this knowledge that gives her the edge in living as freely as possible. Regaining lost instinct and healing injured instinct is truly within one's reach, for it returns when a woman pays close attention through listening, looking, and sensing the world around herself, and then by acting as she sees others act, efficiently, effectively, and soulfully. The opportunity to observe others who have instincts well intact is central to retrieval. Eventually, the listening, looking, and acting in an integral manner becomes a pattern with a rhythm to it. One you practice until it is relearned and becomes automatic again. If our wild natures have been wounded by something or someone, we refuse to lie down and die. I'm currently depressed. It's just like it's hitting me here. It's hitting me here. Like right here. Today I watched documentaries back to back for 3 hours. First was the Gaza war on the West Bank of Israel and Palestine, their conflicts. Then the second documentary series was about women in Saudi Arabia that are wanting to escape the laws that are no longer serving the state of the individual sovereignty of the woman. The third documentary was about Ethiopian and Filipino women that are lied to and told they would get like a hotel job, but when they arrived to the Middle East, the only jobs they had were domestic house jobs, and some of them were captured, passports stolen, or held hostage, and like women just being abused, taken advantage of, and treated like slaves. Employers who think they're like the queen of their households by mistreating other people. It really got me down today. Oh, God, just there's so much evil in this world. There's so much evil in this world. And when people say there's no evil, they're just ignorant. Meaning they ignore the evidence of what's so. And that's frustrating because when people turn a blind eye, it makes it harder for those who do look and want to do something about it. But you know what? I commend the journalists. Who really went out of her way to meet up with the Saudi woman who sought asylum, who escaped from her family, and if she were to get back to Saudi Arabia, she would have been killed. So the journalist really went out of her way to defend her, and it's so funny. It's like it's another woman defending another woman, and same with the other journalists with the domestic violence thing. It's just women helping women, and that's really what it comes down to, because there's so much fear around a man helping a woman nowadays, because women can be very and it's interesting because you hear about the cases of the domestic stuff, women being taken advantage of as slaves. feel like the house servants. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It's just weighing on me so much. And I know everything here seems great on my end. I mean, I'm with Foxy right now, and it's a rainy day on a Sunday, and we have books to read, we have stuff to write about, I have food on the table. You know, things are going okay here on my side, but this depression here, it's going up here. And it's just like, it feels like it's just this thing coming through here. It's like here. And it's just going in, and I'm realizing that this is suffering. This is suffering. I'm saddened by all the people out there that abuse people who feel like they're lesser than, and we keep on comparing each other. Keep on comparing each other. It's just like one big bad dream that we're all co-dreaming together in. It's just like, who the fuck, you know? It's like if one part of the body is sick, then the whole body is sick. That's really what it comes down to. And that's the thing, like, maybe this is a simulation for most of us, and we're in someone else's world, a sick person's world, who dreamed all this stuff up. I'm just so sad right now. I'm so sad for all the women out there who were abused and taken advantage of. I'm so sad for all the blind men, the spiritually blind men who are just crappy. It's like the older the men become, the more stuck in their ways. And I could feel this hardening of the heart, like clay that's just, you know. I can understand now why people die. Because the weight of the world is just too heavy sometimes. The longer you stay here, we die so we can renew again. It's a merciful act to die, to expire on this earth here, because there's just so much evil going on in this world. We refuse to normalize this wound. We call up our instincts and do what we have to do. The wildish woman is, by nature, intense and talented. But because of being cut away from her instincts, she is also naive, accustomed to violence, adaptive to expatriation and exmatriation. Lovers, drugs, drink, money, fame, and power cannot much help the damage done. But a gradual re-entry to the instinctual life can. For this, a woman needs a mother, a good enough, wildish mother. And guess who is waiting to be that mother? The wild woman wonders what is taking you so long to be with her. Really be with her. Not just sometimes or when it's convenient, but consistently. If you are striving to do something you value, it is so important to surround yourself with people who unequivocally support your work. It is both a trap and a poison to have so-called friends who have the same injuries but no real desire to heal them.
We choose as its translation the truth and richness of meaning in what the original word communicates. What is important is to become whole. This is what makes us able to truly love, not from our sense of lack, but from our plenitude, as Yeshua himself loved us. In the same way, we can say that it is because Miriam of Magdala fully lives her feminine sexuality, and because she fully accepts and integrates the masculine dimension of her being, that she is able to speak with authentic knowledge of the Word, though today, as during her time, there are still those who would deny her this. But it is only after the long and slow work of becoming fully human that she can legitimately speak as an anthropos of the fullness of a humanity that, like Yeshua's, is open to the divine and transparent to its clear light, the most invisible and subtle of lights.
Thus Mary turned their hearts toward the good.
Her words are a recollection of the essential, inviting the disciples to abandon vain talk and false rhetoric. She turns their hearts toward the good, reorienting their minds and desires towards that living anthropos within them to which the teacher had urged them to bear witness.
And they began to discuss the meaning of the teacher's words.
His words are a lamp shining upon the darkness of the road. Together, they enlighten each other by discussing them. Like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, they hear and feel the meaning of the words. Did our hearts not burn within us while he talked to us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?
Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the teacher loved you differently from other women. Tell us whatever you remember of any words he told you, which we have not yet heard."
Having been consoled and had his spirits restored by Miriam, Peter now asks her to reveal the teacher's words known to her alone. His attitude suggests a certain deference and respect for her, both because of her special intimacy with Yeshua and because of the peace of the Son of Man that she has just manifested. This deference, however, is not to last for long when she actually began to comply with his request. The character of Miriam of Magdala as revealed in this gospel is fascinating and deserves an entire study in itself. Nevertheless, we must also consider her in the context of how the other Gospels and early Christianity in general viewed her. Some scholars have argued that there are three different Marys in the Gospels: Mary the sinner, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene. Whatever conclusion we may draw, their arguments are not irrelevant, for the stories of these three Marys are indeed those of three different women. But according to the ancient exegesis, this does not literally mean three women, but one woman depicted at different stages of her evolution: sinner, contemplative, and intimate friend of Yeshua. Miriam is, in fact, much more than three women. Just as she is capable of embodying 7 demonic aspects of femininity by obstructing, Satan in Hebrew, the manifestation of being, through dividing it, diabolos, she is equally capable of embodying 7 angelic, or at least more fully human, aspects of femininity as she draws ever nearer to the anthropos, the man-God embodied by her teacher. Thus we see that the early exegetes gave priority to an archetypal reading of Miriam's words, deeds, and gestures. Making use of the canonical Gospels, they considered her as a feminine archetype at work in all human beings, and one whose mutations can shed light on each person's path. We can distinguish at least 7 images or feminine archetypes that come into play in the specific scenes from the canonical Gospels where Miriam appears. A major one is the archetype of the lover whose desire is disoriented or disturbed. This interpretation of the repentant sinner whom we find at Yeshua's feet in Simon the Pharisee's house has become the dominant popular image of recent centuries. Yet there is nothing in the passage itself about the nature of her sin. We have already noted that her transgression could also be related to her thirst for knowledge, her desire to engage in studies reserved for men only in those days. This would certainly be enough to make her a dangerous woman, even an outlaw. Curiously enough, there is nothing in any of the 4 Gospels that states that she was ever a prostitute. Of course, lust may be one of the 7 possessing demons of which Yeshua cures her. If so, it certainly isn't the only one, nor the deadliest. The canonical Gospels offer no information as to the specific nature of the 7 demons or spirits that initially possess Miriam, that is to say, alienate her from her freedom. However, we might make some surmises about them by referring to other texts that were current in those times. According to Evagrius Ponticus, who made a thorough study of such matters, these logismoi, his term for negative or destructive thoughts, act to destroy a person's orientation toward the nous, and then the orientation of the nous toward the pneuma. In other words, they act to obstruct peace, contemplation, and the presence of the sun seeking to establish itself in the person. Lists of such demonic spirits vary. In the West, they later became known as the 7 deadly or cardinal sins: gluttony, fornication, covetousness, sadness, anger, vainglory, pride. Evagrius adds axidia to the list, meaning a kind of despondency or apathetic rejection of spiritual realities. Such negative thought forms, logismoi, make human beings ill, and this sickness is indeed a kind of possession, which can also be interpreted as pathologies that cause alienation from our true nature, such as oral, anal, and genital fixations, which are often linked to vices such as greed, violent temper, and so forth. They are the elements of the pathology of the ego, which is centered upon itself and its own pleasure and gratification.
So I was very broken, very wounded, very, very wounded. That's what happens. I never went from one stage of development to the other in any healthy way. It was all broken. You know, you would call it in psychological terms, there was developmental wounding, and I had built defense mechanisms all throughout my life. And so in all of that, I came to Christ and I was sincere, and I was full of all the gift and talent that you see, not as refined, but it was all there in embryonic form because God's gifts are without repentance. God gave them to me. But the truth was, my soul was so damaged that my gift would have taken me to a place that my character could never have kept me, and the gift that was on me would have destroyed me because my character could not have sustained me, because my soul was wounded. And a lot of us, we come to Christ and we understand when we are born again that our spirit is born again. We also understand that once we get saved, if we had cellulite pre-conversion, we've got cellulite post-conversion. It's just kind of, it's going to go to heaven with us until we stop eating Krispy Kremes and we get on the treadmill. It's just a part of life. But I don't know why we understand that our body is not immediately born again. When we are tripartite beings, God has created us body, soul, and spirit. Our spirit is born again. We know our body isn't immediately born again. We've got to work on it. Then why do we think our soul would be? Our mind, our will, our intellect, our emotions. I brought those to Jesus and they were messed up, really messed up. And so Eugene Peterson in the Message Bible says the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. What God wants to do is move into those broken, fragmented places of our soul. I had to let him in. I had to let him. I had a deeply wounded soul. That's what happens with 12 years of abuse. A lot of spiritual gift and talent, but a deeply wounded soul. It meant that my Christianity was like a yo-yo. 3 great days, 2 really bad days. You carry so much shame and guilt because you're sincere and you come to church. You think, I'll just get it right this week. If I just pray more, if I just read my Bible more, if I just serve more, and eventually it just all collapses. And then you give up and end up walking away from church because you feel like a failure. But what you don't understand is it's a soul issue, not a spirit issue. And if you allow God in to bring healing and restoration to those areas of your soul, he'll bring strength so that you can fulfill destiny. So you can fulfill destiny. This would require weeks and weeks of teaching, but I need to tell you, there's nothing in my life I work on more. Because I'm only ever one thought away, one broken Achilles heel, spiritually speaking, away from going back to what kept me in a stronghold for decades. And so at some point we've got to say, Jesus, come in. I had made a lot of vows. No one will ever treat me like that again. I will never trust like that again. I will never. How many vows have you made? How many vows? So you can't even stay in one church. You can't serve one boss. You can't stay married to one person. You can't keep a proper relationship because somewhere you made a vow. And the minute someone does something that might trigger something that's got nothing to do with them. If I never resolved this, Nick would be paying for something today that somebody else did to me 30 years ago. So many of us, we're making the people in our lives, our children, our friends, our spouses, our church people pay for something they never did because our soul is wounded and our soul is damaged. And we need to allow God to bring healing and to bring strength into those broken places. Beloved, I pray you prosper and you are in good health, even as your soul. How's your soul? How's your soul?